If someone had told you that one day humanity would become a galactic-level anomaly, you would have laughed. But the galaxy was not laughing, it was watching. And what it was seeing it could not understand. At the edge of known space, where mapped territory ends and uncertainty begins, a Galactic Empire reconnaissance unit drifted in silence. Their mission was simple: observe, classify, and report. They had encountered many species before, some primitive, some advanced, and some that had destroyed themselves with their own technology. But this time, their sensors detected something different, something wrong. No known signature, no recognizable energy pattern, no conventional propulsion trace, only an anomaly. Commander Varric stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing. Run the scan again. The technician complied immediately. Systems recalibrated. Data streamed back. The result remained unchanged. An object, or perhaps a vessel, that wasn't traveling through space in any conventional sense, but blending with it, a concept that defied Imperial physics. Unidentified vessel, no origin, no registry, no distress signal, the technician reported. Silence filled the room. Heavy, uncomfortable. Varric leaned forward slightly. Primitive species with stealth like this? No one answered, because no one had an answer. Inside the unknown vessel, there was no panic, no alarms, no chaos, no confusion, only calm. A kind of calm that only exists when every variable has already been accounted for. On the bridge, a human officer stood motionless, watching multiple holographic displays flicker with real-time galactic scans. Contact detected. The AI reported in a neutral tone. Location locked. The officer replied without emotion. Maintain passive mode. No aggression. No retreat. Only observation. The design of the human vessel puzzled Imperial analysts. It wasn't purely mechanical, nor entirely biological. It was a fusion of both. Its hull reacted subtly to surrounding energy fields, almost like it was alive or aware. And most unsettling of all, its heat signature was nearly non-existent. To Imperial scanners, it barely existed at all. It revealed itself only when it chose to. Varric rose from his seat. Send the report to Imperial Command, assign classification. The technician hesitated. Sir, what category should we assign? Varric paused for a moment, then spoke quietly. Unknown but not primitive. That single statement changed everything. Because in the Empire, unknown meant danger, and not primitive meant potential threat. As the Empire adjusted its positioning and moved closer, something unexpected happened. The human vessel shifted, not abruptly, not aggressively, but precisely, deliberately, almost as if it had anticipated the movement. No warning, no signal, no communication, just a reaction. A technician whispered, Sir, their movement isn't random. Varric responded instantly. It's not random, it's responsive. And in that moment, an uncomfortable realization began to take shape. The species they had labeled as primitive was behaving like it already understood them. Suddenly, Imperial scanners intercepted a faint transmission, highly compressed, highly encrypted, directed, decoded. Varric ordered. Seconds passed. Then the decoded output appeared on the screen. But the message made no sense within any known linguistic framework. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a surrender. It was structured, intentional, almost like a query. And it wasn't addressed to the Empire directly, but evaluating them. A strange silence spread across the bridge. No one had ever encountered anything like this before. Primitive species reacted with fear or aggression, but this showed curiosity. Varric spoke slowly, almost himself. They're not responding. A brief pause followed. They're observing. And in that moment, the Galactic Empire felt something it had never felt before. For the first time, they were not the hunters. They might already be the ones being hunted. Then the human vessel made a subtle adjustment in position, silent, controlled, precise, as if it had already calculated its next move. And this was just the beginning, because now the Empire faced a question that no doctrine had prepared them for. If the species was not primitive, then how advanced were they really? And the answer to that, the Galactic Empire did not tolerate uncertainty. Uncertainty was weakness, and weakness was something the Empire eliminated. Within minutes of the report, orders were transmitted across multiple command layers. A small fleet would be dispatched to the anomaly's location. Not a war fleet, not yet, just an inspection force. A demonstration of dominance disguised as protocol, because in the Empire's mind, nothing primitive deserved full military attention. Commander Verex stood before the holographic projection of the sector. "Prepare the inspection group," he ordered. "Acknowledge, Commander," came the response. Ships powered up. Formations adjusted. Weapon systems were brought online, just in case. But officially, this was a peaceful encounter. At least, that's what they believed. Meanwhile, inside the human vessel, nothing changed. No sudden movements. No defensive posturing. No visible reaction to the approaching fleet. But behind the calm exterior, calculations were already running at full speed. Every trajectory, every signal pattern, every energy fluctuation, processed, analyzed, predicted, multiple contacts detected. The human AI reported. The officer nodded slightly. "How many?" "7 vessels. Standard Imperial configuration. Weapons active but not locked." The officer exhaled slowly. "So they're probing." Not a question, a conclusion. The human vessel's internal systems began subtle adjustments, not evasive maneuvers, adaptive positioning. Its stealth field recalibrated, not to hide completely, but to remain partially visible at thresholds that would confuse external sensors. It was intentional. Human strategy was not just to avoid detection, but to control how they were perceived. On the Empire fleet's lead ship, the mood was confident. The approaching object had not reacted aggressively. No defense grid activation, no energy spikes, no communication response. To them, this reinforced their assumption. Primitive, unorganized, possibly unaware. "Maintain formation," one of the Empire officers said. "We will establish contact and assess compliance." Compliance. That word carried weight in the Empire. Everything either complied or was removed. As the fleet closed distance, their senses began picking up more anomalies, not in the human vessel itself, but in the surrounding space. Subtle distortions, micro-adjustments in gravitational readings, almost as if space itself was being shaped. A junior technician frowned. "Commander, the readings are inconsistent." Verex leaned closer to the display. "Explain." "The closer we get, the less predictable their signature becomes. It's adapting to our scan frequency." Silence followed. Then Verex spoke quietly. Adaptive camouflage. But his tone carried something else now. Not confidence. Curiosity mixed with concern. The fleet finally reached optimal engagement range. Weapons remained idle. Shields active. Formation tight. A standard inspection posture. But beneath the surface, tension began to build. Because something about this encounter felt wrong. Too quiet. Too controlled. Then it happened. A signal. Not from the Empire. Not from command. From the human vessel. "Commander, incoming transmission," a technician reported. "Audio? Visual?" Verex asked immediately. "Neither. It's structured data. Direct protocol exchange." The decoded output appeared almost instantly, but instead of a simple greeting, it contained multiple layers of compressed information, position awareness, fleet configuration estimates, signal timing analysis, behavioral prediction models. Verex's eyes widened slightly. "They're analyzing us in real time." A senior officer stepped forward. "That's impossible. No primitive species could process fleet-level data this fast." But the data on the screen suggested otherwise, because the human transmission wasn't random. It was precise. Too precise. Then came the second realization. The humans were not asking questions. They were already answering them. Before the Empire even acted, one of the fleet captains activated his comms. "Commander Verex, their lack of response is concerning. Should we initiate standard warning protocols?" Verex hesitated. Standard protocol meant intimidation signals. weapon priming, power escalation, a show of force. But something told him this situation did not follow standard logic. "Hold," Varix finally said. "We observe first." And that decision may have been the only reason the situation had not already escalated, because across the human vessel, the officer turned slightly toward the AI display. "They're delaying engagement," the AI noted. The officer nodded. "Good. That gives us time to map their behavior." Outside, the Imperial fleet remained in formation, unaware that their every movement was already being predicted, modeled, and categorized, not by sensors alone, but by intelligence that had been studying them far longer than they realized. And then, without warning, one of the Empire's ships adjusted its position slightly. A minor maneuver, routine, harmless, but within the human vessel. That single movement triggered a cascade of calculations. Pattern shift detected, the AI said. The officer's eyes sharpened. "They're testing us." A pause. "Then we test them back." And in that moment, the human vessel's trajectory shifted again, not away from the fleet, but subtly into a position that mirrored their formation perfectly. The Empire officers noticed immediately. Confusion spread across their command channels. Did they just match our vector? No one had an answer, because no one expected a primitive species to understand formation dynamics at this level. Varix clenched his fist slightly. "This is not random behavior," he muttered. "This is strategic response." The Imperial fleet began to feel something unfamiliar creeping in. Not fear, not yet, but doubt. And doubt was far more dangerous, because for the first time since entering known space, the Galactic Empire was no longer sure who was analyzing whom. And deep within the human vessel, the officer spoke quietly to the AI. "They've taken the first step." The AI responded, "Yes," and now they expect a reaction. The officer's gaze remained fixed on the distant fleet. "Then let's see how they respond when we don't give them what they expect." And as both sides hovered in silent tension, the line between observer and observed began to blur. The Empire had come to inspect a primitive species, but what they found instead was something far more unsettling. A species that did not react. It adapted, because this was no longer just first contact. It was mutual analysis. Two civilizations, two strategies, two completely different philosophies of survival. And neither side had made its true move yet. But deep within both command bridges, one silent truth was beginning to form. This encounter was not accidental. It was inevitable. And the moment one side decided, the Empire prided itself on one thing above all else: superiority through understanding. They believed that once a system was observed, it could be predicted. Once predicted, controlled. And once controlled, dominated. But the anomaly in front of them refused to follow that logic. Inside the Imperial command vessel, the atmosphere had shifted. Subtle at first, but undeniable. Screens filled with fluctuating data. Technicians cross-checking results that refused to align. And officers exchanging glances that carried something new: hesitation. "Commander, we've completed a full scan of the vessel," a technician reported. Varix turned sharply. And the technician swallowed slightly before responding. "It's not consistent with any known classification." A pause. "It's not purely mechanical nor biological, and not even a hybrid in the traditional sense." Varix stepped closer to the holographic display. "Explain." The technician brought up layered scan data. At a structural level, the vessel behaves like a living system. It self-regulates, adapts, and repairs micro-damages in real time. Another layer appeared, but at the core, its systems operate like a machine. Precision-based, modular, highly optimized. Varix narrowed his eyes. "So both?" The technician shook his head slowly. "Not both integrated." Silence followed, because integration at that level implied something the Empire had rarely encountered: true convergence between organic adaptability and mechanical precision. Meanwhile, across the void, the human vessel remained still, but Internally, activity was accelerating. Scan completed. The AI reported. The human officer didn't look away from the fleet. Summary. The AI responded. Vessel composition, non-standard. Energy efficiency exceeds known imperial benchmarks by 37%. Structural adaptability suggests self-healing lattice architecture. Command hierarchy appears distributed rather than centralized. A brief pause. Conclusion. Their technology is advanced but rigid. The officer nodded slightly. Rigid systems can be predicted. That was the key difference. Human systems were not just built for power. They were built for flexibility. Back on the Empire side, new data began to emerge. Signals intercepted from a human vessel were not just passive transmissions. They contained patterns. Patterns that resembled analysis feedback loops. Commander, we're detecting something unusual, a signals officer reported. What is it? Varix asked immediately. Their transmissions include temporal offsets. It's as if they're correlating our responses with prior behavior. Varix's expression hardened. You're saying they're learning from us? The officer hesitated. Not just learning, adapting. A heavy silence settled again, because adaptation meant evolution, and evolution meant unpredictability. At that moment, one of the fleet captains opened a direct channel. Commander Varix, with respect, this situation is no longer standard reconnaissance. Varix didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the anomaly. Explain your concern, he finally said. We are not dealing with a passive species. Their responses indicate real-time strategic modeling. If this continues, they may already understand our fleet structure better than we do theirs. That statement lingered in the air. Uncomfortable. Unsettling. True. Varix clenched his jaw slightly. Maintain formation, he ordered, but increase passive scan frequency. I want continuous data streams. Across the void, the human vessel subtly adjusted its position again. Not a retreat, not an advance. A refinement, as if aligning itself perfectly with the Empire's observational vectors. Inside the human bridge, the AI spoke again. They're increasing scan frequency. The officer nodded. Expected. Do we respond? The AI asked. The officer paused, then replied, No. That single word carried weight, because in human strategy, sometimes the most powerful response was no response at all. Back in the Empire fleet, confusion began to grow more visible. Why aren't they reacting? One officer asked. They've had multiple opportunities to disengage or communicate, or attack. Another added quietly. Varix raised a hand. Enough speculation. But even he couldn't ignore the tension building beneath the surface. Then came the next anomaly. A secondary scan from the human vessel, but this time directed not at a single ship, but at the entire formation. Commander, they're mapping our fleet layout, a technician said. Varix stepped closer again. Can you block it? The technician shook his head. No, sir. The scan is intrusive. It's observational. We can't block what we're already exposing. That statement hit harder than expected, because it meant the Empire's own presence was providing data. Every formation shift, every energy fluctuation, every communication delay, all of it visible. Varix's mind began to race. This species didn't stumble upon us, he said slowly. They've been preparing to encounter something like us. A junior officer spoke cautiously. Commander, do you think they expected the Empire specifically? Varix didn't answer immediately, but his silence said enough. Across the void, the human officer finally gave a small signal with his hand, a subtle command, barely noticeable. But immediately, the human vessel initiated a minor systems recalibration. Subsystem alignment complete. The AI reported. The officer exhaled slightly. Good. Now we know their baseline behavior. The AI processed that statement. You are establishing predictive models? The officer's expression remained calm. No. A pause. We are confirming theirs. And that was the difference. The Empire saw control through dominance. Humans saw control through understanding. Back in the Imperial fleet, something shifted again. Not externally, but internally, a subtle breakdown in confidence. Not fear of destruction, but fear of being outmatched in a way they didn't fully comprehend. Varix looked once more at the anomaly on the screen. His voice was quiet now. We are no longer the only ones observing this encounter. And as if confirming his words, the human vessel sent another structured transmission. Not urgent, not aggressive, but deliberate. This time, the decoded output contained a new layer, not just data, but interpretation markers, as if the humans were categorizing the Empire's responses in real time. A technician whispered, "Sir, they're building a behavioral model of us." Varix closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Then we must assume," he paused, "they already know how we think." And that the galaxy had witnessed countless conflicts, but very few moments carried the quiet tension of two forces waiting for the other to make the first irreversible move. Because once that line was crossed, there was no returning to observation, only reaction. On the Imperial flagship, command channels remained open, but conversations had become shorter, sharper, more calculated. The presence of the unknown vessel was no longer just a curiosity. It was a variable that refused to stabilize. "Commander Varix," a fleet captain's voice came through. "The formation is holding, but morale indicators are fluctuating." Varix responded without looking away from the display. "Morale is irrelevant. Stability is what matters." But even as he spoke those words, he knew stability was already being tested. Across the void, the human vessel maintained its position, silent, still, observing, but not passive, never passive. Inside the human bridge, the AI spoke calmly. "They have maintained formation for 12.7 minutes without escalation." The officer nodded slightly, "which means they're waiting for a trigger." The AI responded, "Trigger probability, high." The officer's eyes remained fixed on the Imperial fleet. "Then we give them something to react to, but not something they expect." Back in the Empire fleet, one of the outer ships made a minor adjustment, a simple repositioning maneuver to maintain optimal spacing. Routine, standard, unremarkable, at least from their perspective. But within the human vessel, that movement was instantly detected. "Vector change detected," the AI reported. The officer's gaze sharpened slightly. "They're testing responsiveness." And that was the moment the dynamic shifted. Because what the Empire saw as a routine adjustment, humans interpreted as a probe. "Adjust our position," the officer said calmly. "Not a retreat, not aggression. A mirror." The human vessel subtly shifted its orientation, aligning itself with the Empire's fleet geometry once again. Perfect symmetry, perfect timing, perfect response. On the Imperial side, confusion began to spread. "Commander, their vessel has matched our formation adjustments again." Varix leaned forward. "How precise?" "Exact mirror alignment within margin of error." A pause followed. Then another officer spoke quietly. "That's not coincidence." Varix nodded slowly. "No, it's intentional." The realization was becoming harder to ignore. Every movement the Empire made was being acknowledged, interpreted, reflected, not in aggression, but in understanding. Suddenly, one of the Empire's ships emitted a low-level scanning pulse, a standard diagnostic sweep. But this time it wasn't routine. It was deliberate, a test. "Commander, we've initiated a wide-spectrum scan," the officer reported. Varix's expression remained steady, and the response, before the technician could answer, the results appeared. And what they showed was unsettling. The human vessel had not just tolerated the scan, it had adapted to it. Its signature shifted slightly in response to the scanning frequency, reducing clarity while maintaining visibility. It was as if the vessel was tuning itself in real time. Varix exhaled slowly. "They're not resisting our scans," he said quietly. "They're shaping the data we receive." A senior officer frowned. "Is that even possible?" Varix didn't answer immediately, because the evidence was already in front of them. Meanwhile, inside the human vessel, the AI processed incoming Imperial scan patterns continuously. "They are increasing scan intensity," the AI reported. The officer nodded. "Expected escalation." "Shall we counter?" the AI asked. The officer shook his head slightly. "No direct counter. That would confirm their suspicion." A pause. "Instead, continue adaptive modulation. Let them believe they are still in control of the data. Because control perception was often more powerful than control reality. Back in the Empire fleet, the atmosphere was changing. What began as confidence was now turning into measured caution. "Commander," a fleet captain's voice returned, requesting permission to deploy active deterrent signals. Varix considered the request. Active deterrence meant escalating power output, a show of force designed to intimidate. But something about this encounter made him hesitate, because intimidation only worked on those who could be intimidated. And so far, there had been no indication that the humans responded to fear the same way. "Denied," Varix said finally. "We maintain current posture." A brief silence followed across the channels. Not disagreement, but acknowledgement. Then it happened again. Another movement. This time, one of the Empire's central ships adjusted its vector slightly more than before. Not a probe, but a repositioning to maintain formation integrity. And instantly, the human vessel responded, not by moving closer, not by withdrawing, but by aligning its orientation in a way that matched the Empire's internal structural symmetry. A technician whispered, "It's anticipating our fleet logic." Varix's voice was low now, not anticipating. A pause. Learning. And that distinction mattered more than anything else, because anticipation could be countered. Learning evolved. Inside the human bridge, the officer finally allowed a faint shift in expression, not emotion, not excitement, but confirmation. "They are confirming their own patterns through repetition," the AI stated. The officer replied, "Which means their behavior is consistent." "Predictable?" the AI asked. The officer paused for a moment, then answered carefully, "Not predictable." Another pause. "Structured." And structured systems could be modeled back in the Empire fleet. Tension began to manifest in subtle ways. Communication delays, slight hesitation in command responses, increased cross-checking between ships. Not chaos, but friction. Varix noticed it immediately. "This is no longer a passive observation," he said quietly. "This is an active exchange." A junior officer asked, "Exchange of what, Commander?" Varix's eyes remained fixed on the anomaly. Information. And in that moment, the encounter evolved again. No longer just first contact, not just reconnaissance, but something closer to a silent dialogue between two minds. One side revealing itself through action, the other interpreting through observation, and neither side willing to show its full capability first, because the first to reveal their true limits would also reveal their vulnerabilities. Across the void, both fleets held position, motionless, yet constantly calculating, waiting, adapting, preparing, and then, without warning, a new signal appeared on Imperial sensors, stronger than before, broader, more direct, not from the human vessel alone, but from within the surrounding space itself. "Commander, something is changing," a technician reported. Varix's eyes sharpened. "What kind of change?" The technician hesitated. "The human vessel, it's not just responding anymore." A pause. "It's initiating a new pattern." And that was a moment everything began to shift, because now the humans were no longer. The galaxy had witnessed countless conflicts, but very few moments carried the quiet tension of two forces waiting for the other to make the first irreversible move. Because once that line was crossed, there was no returning to observation, only reaction. On the Imperial flagship, command channels remained open, but conversations had become shorter, sharper, more calculated. The presence of the unknown vessel was no longer just a curiosity. It was a variable that refused to stabilize. "Commander Varix," a fleet captain's voice came through. "The formation is holding, but morale indicators are fluctuating." Varix responded without looking away from the display. "Morale is irrelevant. Stability is what matters." But even as he spoke those words, he knew stability was already being tested. Across the void, the human vessel maintained its position, silent, still, observing, but not passive, never passive. Inside the human bridge, the AI spoke calmly. "They have maintained formation for 12.7 minutes without escalation." The officer nodded slightly, which means they're waiting for a trigger. The AI responded, "Trigger probability, high." The officer's eyes remained fixed on the Imperial fleet. "Then we give them something to react to, but not something they expect." Back in the Empire fleet, one of the outer ships made a minor adjustment, a simple repositioning maneuver to maintain optimal spacing. Routine, standard, unremarkable, at least from their perspective. But within the human vessel, that movement was instantly detected. Vector change detected, the AI reported. The officer's gaze sharpened slightly. They're testing responsiveness. And that was the moment the dynamic shifted. Because what the Empire saw as a routine adjustment, humans interpreted as a probe. Adjust our position, the officer said calmly. Not a retreat, not aggression. A mirror. The human vessel subtly shifted its orientation, aligning itself with the Empire's fleet geometry once again. Perfect symmetry, perfect timing, perfect response. On the Imperial side, confusion began to spread. Commander, their vessel has matched our formation adjustments again. Varix leaned forward. How precise? Exact mirror alignment within margin of error. A pause followed. Then another officer spoke quietly. That's not coincidence. Varix nodded slowly. No, it's intentional. The realization was becoming harder to ignore. Every movement the Empire made was being acknowledged, interpreted, reflected, not in aggression, but in understanding. Suddenly, one of the Empire's ships emitted a low-level scanning pulse, a standard diagnostic sweep. But this time it wasn't routine. It was deliberate, a test. Commander, we've initiated a wide-spectrum scan, the officer reported. Varix's expression remained steady, and the response, before the technician could answer, the results appeared. And what they showed was unsettling. The human vessel had not just tolerated the scan, it had adapted to it. Its signature shifted slightly in response to the scanning frequency, reducing clarity while maintaining visibility. It was as if the vessel was tuning itself in real time. Varix exhaled slowly. They're not resisting our scans, he said quietly. They're shaping the data we receive. A senior officer frowned. Is that even possible? Varix didn't answer immediately, because the evidence was already in front of them. Meanwhile, inside the human vessel, the AI processed incoming Imperial scan patterns continuously. They are increasing scan intensity, the AI reported. The officer nodded. Expected escalation. Shall we counter? The AI asked. The officer shook his head slightly. No direct counter. That would confirm their suspicion. A pause. Instead, continue adaptive modulation. Let them believe they are still in control of the data. Because control perception was often more powerful than control reality. Back in the Empire fleet, the atmosphere was changing. What began as confidence was now turning into measured caution. Commander, a fleet captain's voice returned, requesting permission to deploy active deterrent signals. Varix considered the request. Active deterrence meant escalating power output, a show of force designed to intimidate. But something about this encounter made him hesitate, because intimidation only worked on those who could be intimidated. And so far, there had been no indication that the humans responded to fear the same way. Denied, Varix said finally. We maintain current posture. A brief silence followed across the channels. Not disagreement, but acknowledgement. Then it happened again. Another movement. This time, one of the Empire's central ships adjusted its vector slightly more than before. Not a probe, but a repositioning to maintain formation integrity. And instantly, the human vessel responded, not by moving closer, not by withdrawing, but by aligning its orientation in a way that matched the Empire's internal structural symmetry. A technician whispered, "It's anticipating our fleet logic." Varix's voice was low now, not anticipating. A pause. Learning. And that distinction mattered more than anything else, because anticipation could be countered. Learning evolved. Inside the human bridge, the officer finally allowed a faint shift in expression, not emotion, not excitement, but confirmation. They are confirming their own patterns through repetition, the AI stated. The officer replied, which means their behavior is consistent. Predictable, the AI asked. The officer paused for a moment, then answered carefully, not predictable. Another pause, structured. And structured systems could be modeled back in the Empire fleet. Tension began to manifest in subtle ways. Communication delays, slight hesitation in command responses, increased cross-checking between ships. Not chaos, but friction. Varix noticed it immediately. This is no longer a passive observation, he said quietly. This is an active exchange. A junior officer asked, Exchange of what, Commander? Varex's eyes remained fixed on the anomaly. Information. And in that moment, the encounter evolved again. No longer just first contact, not just reconnaissance, but something closer to a silent dialogue between two minds. One side revealing itself through action, the other interpreting through observation, and neither side willing to show its full capability first, because the first to reveal their true limits would also reveal their vulnerabilities. Across the void, both fleets held position, motionless, yet constantly calculating, waiting, adapting, preparing, and then, without warning, a new signal appeared on Imperial sensors, stronger than before, broader, more direct, not from the human vessel alone, but from within the surrounding space itself. Commander, something is changing, a technician reported. Varex's eyes sharpened. What kind of change? The technician hesitated. The human vessel, it's not just responding anymore. A pause. It's initiating a new pattern. And that was a moment everything began to shift, because now the humans were no longer. The balance of the encounter had always been fragile, a silent equilibrium between observation and action. But equilibrium never lasts forever. Inside the Imperial flagship, the tension had evolved into something more defined now. Not confusion, not hesitation, but anticipation. Because every officer could feel it. Something was about to change. Commander Varex, a fleet operations officer, reported, anomalous energy readings detected across multiple vectors. Varex immediately turned toward the display. Explain. Multiple signatures not originating from the anomaly vessel alone. They are appearing across adjacent sectors. Varex's eyes narrowed. Multiple sectors? Yes, sir. And they are synchronized. That single word, synchronized, carried weight, because it implied coordination beyond a single visible unit. Before anyone could respond further, the sensors updated again. And this time, the readings multiplied. Commander, additional vessels detected. A pause. Many additional vessels. The bridge fell silent. Screens began populating with new contacts. Not random, not scattered, strategically positioned. How many? Varex asked, his voice now sharper. The technician hesitated before answering. Dozens, no. Hundreds of signatures emerging from cloak positions. A ripple of realization moved across the bridge. This was not a single vessel encounter anymore. This was something much larger. Across multiple sectors, human ships began to reveal themselves, not by sudden appearance, but by the gradual fading of stealth fields. Layer by layer, signatures emerged, hidden assets that had been present all along, and the Empire had not detected them. Varex's expression remained controlled, but his mind was rapidly recalculating. This was not an isolated contact, he said quietly. A senior officer completed the thought. This was a forward deployment. Back in the human vessel, the AI spoke calmly. Fleet emergence phase initiated. The officer nodded. Finally, because what the Empire had seen so far was only a fraction of humanity's presence in the region. Human ships began forming structured patterns across space. Not chaotic, not scattered, but organized into layered formations, each unit supporting others through overlapping coverage. The Empire fleet quickly adjusted formation in response. Weapon systems were brought to a higher readiness state. Shields reinforced. Communication channels intensified. Commander Varex, multiple unknown fleets now confirmed. They are maintaining distance but have us surrounded across multiple vectors. Varex remained still for a moment, then spoke slowly. This was planned. No one disagreed, because the positioning was too precise to be accidental. Across the void, human vessels continued to emerge, each one seamlessly integrating into a larger, coordinated structure, not centralized, but unified through shared strategy. Inside the human command network, data streams flowed continuously. Fleet positioning complete, the AI reported. The officer responded. Enemy fleet status? Fully contained within monitored engagement zones. No escape vectors without detection. The officer nodded slightly. So they're inside the net now. The AI processed that statement. Containment achieved without direct engagement. The officer's tone remained calm. That was the objective. Back in the Empire fleet, awareness began to shift into something more urgent. Commander, a tactical officer said, we are now within a multi-vector perimeter. Varex observed the updated map. Human vessels positioned across multiple axes, creating overlapping zones of control. Are we encircled? One officer asked quietly. Varix did not answer immediately, but his silence confirmed it. Not a traditional encirclement, but something more subtle, a strategic containment. Why would they deploy this many ships without engagement? A senior officer questioned. Varix replied slowly, because engagement is not their immediate objective. He paused. They are demonstrating capability. A demonstration, not an attack, not a provocation, a statement. Meanwhile, human vessels across the formation remained perfectly still after completing their deployment. No aggressive movement, no escalation, just presence. Inside the human bridge, the officer spoke quietly. They've recognized the scale. The AI responded, yes. Their response indicates reassessment of threat level. The officer nodded. Good. That's exactly what we wanted. Because escalation was not always about destruction. Sometimes it was about perception. Back in the Empire fleet, internal discussions became more cautious. These are not random deployments, a fleet analyst said. They position themselves to control multiple engagement corridors simultaneously. Varix studied the formation carefully. Each human vessel was placed in a way that overlapped sensor coverage and firing arcs across the entire region. Strategic redundancy, he muttered. Another officer added, they are prepared for a coordinated multi-directional response. Varix exhaled slowly. They are not just present. A pause. They are organized for contingency. And that realization carried a deeper implication. Humanity had not arrived unprepared. They had arrived with options, multiple layers of response, multiple fallback strategies. Inside the human vessel, the officer turned slightly toward the AI. They've stopped repositioning. Yes, the AI confirmed. Why? The officer asked. The AI analyzed the fleet behavior. They are reassessing rather than advancing. The officer's expression remained neutral, so they've chosen caution over escalation. Yes. The officer nodded once. That means they understand enough to hesitate. Back in the Empire fleet, hesitation had indeed taken root, but not weakness. Caution, measured response. Varix spoke firmly now. We will not initiate aggression. A pause, but we will not withdraw either, because retreat would signal vulnerability, and aggression without understanding could lead to miscalculation. So the Empire remained in place, watching, evaluating, adjusting, and for the first time since this encounter began, the situation had shifted from a simple reconnaissance mission to a standoff between two fully aware civilizations, one operating on hierarchy and doctrine, the other on distribution and adaptability, and neither willing to reveal their full capabilities first. Across the void, fleets from both sides held position within the same shared space, each side knowing that any sudden move could redefine everything. And then a subtle change occurred in the human formation, not a repositioning, not a withdrawal, but a directional alignment toward a specific node within the Empire fleet. Varix noticed it immediately. They're focusing on a single point, he said quietly. A junior officer asked, target? Varix didn't answer right away, because something about the pattern felt intentional, not random, not exploratory, deliberate. Inside the human bridge, the officer spoke calmly. They've stabilized their formation. The AI responded, yes, they are holding position. The officer's gaze remained fixed. Then it's time. The AI paused briefly. Time for what? The officer's expression remained steady. Phase 1 demonstration. And with that, the humans prepared to make their first true strategic move in this encounter. Not an attack, not a retreat, but something far more revealing. A controlled action designed to test how the Empire would respond under pressure. Pressure changes everything, not instantly, but inevitably. And in space, where silence dominates, pressure is measured not by sound, but by decisions. Inside the Imperial flagship, the atmosphere had shifted into controlled urgency. Every officer now understood the stakes were no longer theoretical. This was no longer a simple reconnaissance encounter. It was a live strategic scenario unfolding in real time. Commander Varix, a tactical officer, reported, human fleet alignment is now concentrated toward our central formation node. Varix immediately focused on the updated display. Multiple human vessels, all subtly oriented toward a specific region of the Empire fleet. Are they preparing to strike? One officer asked. Varix studied the pattern carefully. No, he said slowly. They are signaling intent. A senior analyst stepped forward. Intent to isolate? Varix nodded slightly. Or to test our reaction at a critical point. Because that's what this encounter had become. A test, not just of firepower, but of behavior. Back in the Empire command structure, communication channels began to show increased activity. Fleet commanders exchanging rapid assessments. Tactical recalibrations being proposed. Contingency plans being updated. Commander, a fleet captain's voice came through. We recommend adjusting formation to counter potential flanking vectors. Varix responded immediately. Maintain current formation. A brief hesitation followed, then acknowledgement, because any large-scale movement now could signal weakness or trigger a response, and neither outcome was acceptable without certainty. Across the void, human vessels remained steady. No sudden maneuvers, no aggressive advance, just alignment, precision, coordination. Inside the human vessel, the AI reported, Empire fleet has not adjusted formation in response to our alignment. The officer nodded. They are choosing stability. Interpretation, the AI asked. They are cautious but not passive. A pause, which means they are capable of escalation, but unwilling to initiate without cause. Back in the Empire fleet, tension began to manifest in subtle ways again. Not fear, but the weight of uncertainty. Because every assumption they made about the humans was being tested in real time. Commander, a senior officer said quietly, their behavior suggests they are probing our decision thresholds. Varix responded, they are studying how we react under controlled pressure. Another officer added, and they are doing it without firing a single shot. That realization lingered, because the absence of violence did not mean the absence of threat. It meant restraint. Meanwhile, human fleets maintained their positions across multiple vectors. Their presence alone was enough to create a sense of containment without direct confrontation. Inside the human command bridge, the officer finally spoke again. They haven't broken formation. The AI responded, no, their cohesion remains intact. The officer's expression remained calm. That tells us something important. What? The AI asked. They value structure. A pause. And structure resists disruption. Back in the Empire fleet, internal discussions reached a new level of seriousness. Commander Varix, a senior strategist, said, we must consider that their current posture is not aggressive in nature, but it demonstrates overwhelming positional awareness. Varix looked at the formation again. Human ships placed across multiple sectors, each covering overlapping zones. If conflict were to begin, the strategist continued, they could engage from multiple angles simultaneously. Varix nodded slowly. Yes, but they are not initiating conflict. A pause, which suggests they are waiting. Waiting for what? The strategist asked. Varix's voice lowered slightly. For us to make the first decisive move. And that was the uncomfortable truth, because whichever side acted first in a meaningful way would reveal its doctrine, its limits, and its priorities. Inside the human vessel, the officer watched the Empire fleet carefully, then spoke quietly. They still haven't escalated. The AI responded, they are maintaining defensive posture. The officer nodded. That's consistent with their hierarchy. A pause. Centralized systems tend to avoid unnecessary risk. Then why deploy so many ships? The AI asked. The officer's eyes remained focused, because they don't know which of our ships matters most. Back in the Empire fleet, that uncertainty was becoming increasingly apparent. Commander, a tactical officer said, we cannot identify a single command node within the human formation. Varix responded immediately, because there isn't one. The officer hesitated. Then their command structure is distributed across all units. Varix nodded, which means targeting leadership is not a viable strategy. That fundamentally altered engagement doctrine, because if there is no central command to disrupt, then every unit must be treated as equally capable, and that required a different approach entirely. Across the void, both sides continued to hold position, but internally, calculations were accelerating. The Empire was attempting to adapt their hierarchical strategy to a decentralized opponent, while humans were analyzing how centralized systems react under pressure. Two different philosophies, two different ways of processing conflict, and both were being tested simultaneously. Then, without warning, the human formation initiated a subtle but noticeable change. Not a full repositioning, but a coordinated micro-adjustment across multiple vessels. Commander, a technician reported quickly, They've shifted alignment across all sectors. Varix studied the updated formation. This was not random. It was synchronized across the entire human fleet. They're demonstrating coordination at scale. Varix said quietly. A senior officer added, and doing so without centralized signaling delays. That meant their communication efficiency was extremely high, or fundamentally different from Empire protocols. Back on the human side, the officer spoke calmly. They've acknowledged our structure. The AI responded, yes, their analysis suggests understanding of our distributed presence. The officer nodded slightly. Good. A pause. Then they're ready for the next stage. The AI processed the implication. Next stage, engagement? The officer shook his head. No. A slight pause. Next stage, response. Because now the objective was no longer just observation. It was interaction. Controlled, measured, informative. Back in the Empire fleet, Varix made a quiet decision, one that would define the next phase of the encounter. Prepare limited response protocol, he ordered. A technician looked up. Commander, what level? Varix's eyes remained fixed on the human formation. Non-lethal demonstration. A pause followed as a command was processed. Because this would be the Empire's first intentional action beyond observation. A controlled signal. A test of how the humans would react to a direct stimulus. Execute, Varix said finally, and as the Empire prepared to send its first deliberate response. Across the void, the human fleet remained perfectly still, waiting, ready, because now the Empire had chosen to act, and the moment that signal was released, everything. The moment had finally arrived. Not a battle, not yet, but something far more critical. A decision that would define the outcome before a single weapon was fired. Inside the Imperial flagship, silence spread across the command bridge as systems prepared to execute the order. Limited response protocol, armed and ready, a technician confirmed. Varix stood still, his gaze locked on the human fleet. This was not aggression. This was communication through controlled demonstration, a language the Empire understood well. Execute, Varix said calmly. A pulse of energy was emitted from one of the Empire's forward vessels. Not a weapon strike, not a destructive beam. A calibrated output, a signal designed to test reaction thresholds, to assert presence, to measure response. Across the void, the human fleet detected it instantly. Incoming energy pulse, the AI reported. The human officer's eyes narrowed slightly. Source confirmed. The Empire had acted, and now the humans would respond. Analyze, the officer said. The AI processed the incoming signal within milliseconds. Energy output is controlled. Non-lethal, likely a demonstration of capability, rather than intent to engage. The officer nodded. So they're communicating. Yes. A brief pause followed. Then the officer spoke quietly. Then we respond in kind. Back in the Empire fleet, all eyes were on the anomaly, because this was the moment that would reveal the true nature of the humans. Would they react aggressively, defensively, or not at all? Seconds passed. Then more. No immediate retaliation. No sudden maneuver, no escalation. Varix's expression remained steady, but internally, he was analyzing every possible outcome. They're not reacting immediately, one officer whispered. Patience, Varix replied quietly. They are calculating. And then it happened. The human vessel responded, not with force, not with a counterattack, but with a transmission, a structured, multi-layered signal directed across the Empire fleet. Commander, incoming decoded message, a technician reported. The display appeared, and this time the message was different. Not a pattern for analysis, but a structured exchange of information. It contained mapped interpretations of the Empire's energy pulse, its intensity, its purpose, its limitations, along with contextual markers suggesting the humans had fully understood the intent behind it. Varix read the data carefully. His expression changed subtly. They understood that as a demonstration, not a threat. A senior officer added, and they responded without hostility. Varix nodded slowly. This confirms it. Confirms what, Commander? Varix turned toward the holographic projection of the human fleet. They are not reacting blindly. A pause. They are interpreting intent before action. That was the difference. The Empire responded to actions. Humans responded to meaning behind actions. Across the void, the human officer stood quietly, observing the Empire fleet's reaction to their response. They processed our signal correctly, the AI reported. The officer nodded slightly. Good. That means communication channels are viable. Shall we escalate interaction? The AI asked. The officer paused, then replied calmly. Yes, but carefully. Because now that both sides had demonstrated controlled responses, the foundation for something new had been established. Not war, not peace, but understanding through structured exchange. Back in the Empire fleet, the atmosphere had changed again. Not tension, but recognition. Commander Verex, a senior analyst, said, their response demonstrates restraint and comprehension. Verex nodded. They are not primitive. A pause. They are deliberate. And that realization carried weight across the entire command structure, because this encounter was no longer about identifying a threat. It was about understanding a peer. Inside the human vessel, the officer finally allowed a faint shift in tone. Not emotion, but acknowledgement. They've acknowledged our communication. The AI responded, yes, interaction parameters are now established. The officer looked toward the distant fleet. For the first time, they're not just observing us. A pause. They're engaging. And that changed everything, because engagement meant mutual awareness. Mutual awareness meant mutual adaptation. And mutual adaptation meant the encounter would no longer follow a one-sided path. Back in the Empire fleet, Verex made a final observation. This species, he said quietly, does not seek dominance through immediate force. A pause. They seek understanding before commitment. A senior officer responded, then we are dealing with a civilization that prioritizes strategy over aggression. Verex nodded slowly. And that makes them, he paused, unpredictable. Across the void, both fleets now stood in a new kind of balance. Not adversaries, not allies, but participants in a developing interaction that neither side fully controlled. The Empire had expected a primitive encounter. What they found instead was a civilization that mirrored their actions, analyzed their intent, and responded with precision and restraint. And humanity had proven something far more important than strength. They had proven adaptability, coordination, patience, and above all, awareness. As the stars stretched silently between them, both civilizations understood one undeniable truth. This was not the end of an encounter. It was the beginning of a long, complex, and carefully measured relationship, one that would shape the future of the galaxy itself. And somewhere deep within the Empire command structure, a quiet realization took hold. Humanity was not just another species to be studied. They were a force that learned, and a species that, once aware, would never again be underestimated. Humanity didn't win through overwhelming force. They won through understanding, unity, adaptability, and the will to remain composed in the face of the unknown. If this story gave you chills, comment HFY below. Like this video if you stand with humanity. Subscribe for more epic HFY stories. And share this with someone who loves sci-fi. Because the galaxy is